No mai haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups. Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hi, Kaz here with my friend Anke Richter, who's the author of the fantastic book, Cult Trip. She's bringing us an exciting event this year.
Thanks, Kaz. Australasia, get ready for Decult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left cultic groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website, decult.net, for all the info.
Come cult-proof your life at Decult 2024. I'll be there.
Hello. Today it's just me from the Cult Chat team. Liz and Lindy are taking a break from recording this week because right now it's really crazy for both of them. There's still three of us today though. I'm chatting with two friends of mine, Nat and Anke. Kia ora, both of you lovely ladies.
Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, Kaz and Nat.
I've brought these two together for this conversation with me to talk about their work in the cultiverse. Nat, or Natalie Malcon, is the producer-director of the Warner Brothers documentary series, which was released a few weeks ago on TVNZ, called Escaping Utopia. It's an extraordinary series. It explores the reality of life for people living in Gloriavale and the extremes they must go to escape. Several years ago, Natalie also produced and directed the docudrama Heaven and Hell, the Centrepoint Story, which stars yours truly, amongst others. The stories are completely different, but they're also scarily the same. Anke, or Anke Richter, as others might know her, is a journalist with over 10 years' experience at the coalface investigating the real harm behind the glossy fronts of culty groups, with experience investigating both Centrepoint and Gloriavale. We have spoken to Anke on the show before. Check out episode 8, The Accidental Cult Reporter, to hear some more of Anke's backstory. As well as previous reporting and writing about both the Gloriavale cult and the Centrepoint cult, right now Anke is neck deep in organising Decult, the first cult awareness and prevention conference New Zealand has ever had. So today we're going to talk about escaping Utopia and Gloriavale with a few splashes of Centrepoint thrown in for good measure. I hope with the knowledge that we all bring to the table, we'll explore some of the complexities involved in uncovering the secrets hidden by harmful groups, the challenges of navigating different narratives, and the power of story to capture the public's attention. So, Nat, we'll start with you. Can you tell us a bit about the filming of Escaping Utopia?
Wow, the filming started in 2022. We got the funding, I think, and about halfway through the year we started filming, and it went right through till the end of 2023. I think thinking about the most challenging thing was probably the isolation, and really hard to grasp that until you've actually been there. I know you've been there, Anke. It's so far away from everywhere. The first time I went there was a black night. I hadn't been there during the day, so I had absolutely no bearings. And I was with my researcher. There's no street lights or anything, you're on a gravel road and there's no cell phone reception around there. And it's just eerily quiet. And she got really paranoid. So as we were driving along, every time we went past a farmhouse, she'd say, house, house, because she was so scared that we were going to get a puncture or break down, and with no cell phone reception in this sort of very, very dark part of the planet. And that was the night that I first met Boaz, who he snuck out from Gloriavale very bravely at about 10 o'clock at night. And we met him at Marcus's house, who's the farmer in Escape in Utopia, and talked for probably about 3 hours. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when we left.
That was a remarkable interview, by the way. I was very struck by Boaz and hearing his story. Extremely moving.
Yes. When we first started looking at Gloriavale, I spoke to Liz Gregory from the Leavers, your co-host from the Leavers Trust, and she told me that I was absolutely dreaming that I would ever be able to talk to anybody on the inside of Gloriavale. But in the time that it took us to get the funding, which was about, I think we were trying to get funding for a good year and a half, things definitely started to shift inside Gloriavale, and in that time, there was more unrest. And yeah, Boaz emerged as somebody who was willing to, to go on camera.
That unveiling and the change and the move of him from his position of afraid, and he stayed afraid really throughout the whole thing, but his bravery as he moved from that stuck position into a exiting position. It's remarkable.
I mean, he was so brave. He really did, put his head on the line to speak out. And if he hadn't have left the community, would we have been able to tell that story? We would have had to really look at that, because we didn't want to put anybody in danger, obviously. But, thankfully Tabitha, his wife, eventually got the courage to leave. So we were there sort of for that journey.
I do wonder how much the involvement with you actually was part of that process for him of having those conversations on the outside.
Well, yeah, potentially that's it. I've never actually really thought about that, but yes, potentially, I guess the more sort of exposure to other people, and obviously it's not just me, it's my crew, and I had an amazing crew of, really caring, kind people. So I guess the more caring, kind people.
Yeah, and there's also something about telling your story to another person. I have to say, I've seen this over and over again, how confronting hearing your own narrative that you tell yourself. So it's not someone's not imposing on you something else, but you're telling your own narrative in your own words to an interested person who just receives it. It's extraordinary all by itself.
Can I just tell you a little anecdote about Boaz after he viewed series? He said afterwards, it's just seeing my name up on the screen, Boaz Benjamin, and then the way you keyed my aunt, Boaz's aunt, and then my grandfather, Boaz's grandfather, I suddenly just realized that I am a person.
Wow.
I am somebody. So that was, incredibly moving. I think I burst into tears when he said that. Yeah. Yeah, I am a person. I am somebody.
Wow. Yeah. Now, I just want to point out to listeners, we're having a little bit of sound issues, and Anke is possibly popping in and out of this call because of her internet. So if she cuts out or disappears anywhere along the way, I'm not even sure if you're still there right now. Anke, are you with us still?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been listening.
You've been listening. Good. Make a few noises every so often so we know you haven't vanished.
Sure.
I'm dominating Anke.
That's good. Usually I'm the one to cut in and take over. So now, Natalie, you deserve to be dominating this conversation because you've done incredible work. Can I just say, as someone who really understands the landscape that you worked in, because we've been circling the same drain for many years, right? We worked together. Or I helped you a bit for the Heaven and Hell Centrepoint doco, and I know so many of the people in your documentary now, and I would be the first person to be critical and go, she missed this, or she doesn't know that, or I'm not so easy to be impressed by cult docos, to be honest, because sometimes I feel I've seen it all and I know too much. You have done amazing work, and I cannot thank you enough for what you've done, and the nuance and the survivor focus, the shocking parts, the heart-rending stories, but also just the psychology of it all, and following someone like Boaz and how he's leaving, and actually for people to get up close, get a feel for how conflicting it all is. That there isn't just joy because someone's out and then life is fine because they're finally out of the evil cult. It's so much more complex. And I think you've captured that really well. So thank you.
Thank you, Anke. That means a lot from you.
Okay. Nat, I'm curious to know, what were the parallels that you found in the filming of these two different documentaries, one about Gloriavale and one about Centrepoint?
Definitely some key parallels. I think for listeners who are not familiar with the Centrepoint story, it was founded in the late 1970s, early 80s, in Albany, just north of Auckland. And it had a leader by the name of Bert Potter. I think at its height, it had about 300 members. So even at its capacity, still half the size the Gloriavale community is today. And it was based on therapy. So it called itself a therapeutic community. And the people there spent a large chunk of their time partaking in various group therapy sessions, with one of the main focuses being sexuality and breaking down boundaries around sex. So there was lots of very public sex and nudity. And when people joined Centrepoint, they did so with the knowledge that that was what they were joining, which is, very different from the community that the people that joined Gloriavale joined. So in contrast, Gloriavale began a decade earlier. Its founder's name was Neville Cooper, and he was a traveling evangelist from Australia. And the reason most of the early members joined this group was, for the most part, they were devout Christians, and they joined because they thought it was some sort of utopian socialist society. They shared all their possessions, everyone was equal, and they were out there, wanting to do good in the world and in the community. So both of them, the parallel is they were both founded on a premise that they share all their belongings, which is where I think they both started to go off track as well. So they started stripping back their identities and their lives before. So it started with the clothing. And Centrepoint, they shared a wardrobe. So basically a shared wardrobe, first in, best dressed. It was whoever got there first got the pick of the outfit. but no one was allowed their own clothes. And in Gloriavale, of course, as we know, they have a uniform.
It's an interesting that you noticed that, actually.
Yeah, and that was sort of the beginning, I guess, of sort of, making themselves different from the outside world. Cutting them off was what followed. So first of all, they sort of stripped them back, losing their identities, their individuality. And then both Bert and Neville started to instruct them to, limit the contact with the outside world and stop contact with their families. And they both started talking about the outside world. So that concept that the outside was inferior to the inside, the inside, they're the knowing ones. They know better than society. The laws don't need to apply, they've got superior knowledge. They're the enlightened ones. Yeah, that's where they sort of start veering off from their initial dream, as the leaders sort of gain their power. It's like they also gained the more control they got, the more they wanted.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the other thing that the two leaders had in common is that they both, as they got more power, they started indulging in some pretty sick sexual abuse. And both of them were convicted of sexual offences. Both of them actually were both in prison at the same time in the 1990s, one in the North Island and one in the South Island.
And then when they both came out, they returned to that community where their victims were.
Yes, but the difference is, of course, that Hopeful, or Neville, who became Hopeful, he only served 11 months of his 5-year sentence. So he was back really quickly. Whereas I think Bert, Anke, you probably can correct me if I'm wrong. I think he was in prison for about 9 years. So, by the time he came out, the community had moved on.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Anke?
Yeah, that's a good point. That the community in Albany was definitely changing when Bert was in prison, and then that did also make people leave. I don't know if that was the case in Gloriavale, because in Gloriavale they could always uphold this narrative that the convictions weren't rightful. He was just convicted because he spread the gospel. In fact, there are still people today in Gloriavale who do not actually know, let alone believe, or do not actually know that his convictions were for sexual abuse. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also in Centrepoint, there were these other convictions. More people went to prison, and also the drug manufacturing that they did there on the premises, and that they took these psychedelics together with teenagers was a bit of a different thing. Yeah, I can add more too, but go on, Nat. It's really great to hear your analysis.
Well, the other thing that I realized that they have in common, the two leaders, I'm just focusing on the leaders at the moment, is they were both salesmen before they became cult leaders. They both, I think, Hopeful was a sewing machine salesman, and Bert sold vacuum cleaners, I think. Is that right? But
yeah, absolutely. And he was also he had a massive pest control company that actually was all over New Zealand.
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, that's fascinating in itself, isn't it? I think they were both door-to-door salesmen.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say they were both very good at hooking people, selling something to them, finding their flock, and then taking those people under false pretense in a totally wrong direction. I think they absolutely had that in common.
Yes, they moved on to selling ideas, right?
Yeah.
And they were also, the other thing that they had in common is that they were significantly older than the people they recruited. they were both born in, I think they were both born in 1925 or 1926. They're both born the same year. And I think Neville was in his 40s when he started gathering people for his community, and Bert, I think he was in his 50s.
And that reminds me of David Berg, the leader of the Children of God. He also was a generation older than his followers, and they used to call him dad or father, and their children called him grandpa. So there's something in this.
I mean, there is something alarming, isn't there, about people older than the people that they're hanging out with. It's always a red flag, isn't it?
Yeah, mentor or fatherly figure. Okay, so Anke, you must have got some thoughts on this, the parallels that you found in your research.
Yeah, the most surprising parallel was for me, who've done quite a few years of research into Centrepoint. At the time, I wasn't aware of Gloriavale at all, to be honest, until someone actually from Centrepoint, Barry Leslie, made me aware of them. But never thought of Gloriavale as being anything similar to a sex cult, as what Centrepoint was always labeled. But these parallels are actually there, and it starts with the shared living quarters, the bedrooms of families together with parents, watching them being there when they were having sex, and also within the communities, not just a Centrepoint, but also in the early days at Gloriavale, there being such a quite an emphasis, or almost like an unconditioning or rewiring of the members to embrace sex in a different way and be really natural about it, to practice it together. In Gloriavale, in under the sort of pretense of marriage education or marriage counseling, and that was shown in the doco in a tasteful way, just to get an idea of what they did there, because that's certainly not something that really came out or that Gloriavale was known for. But the normalization, or just sort of, I mean, I would now say probably for the gratification of the leaders of the community, to basically introduce something that would then also make it easier for them to have access to younger people and to put their warped views on everyone, by creating that kind of very sexualized culture that Gloriavale also had, especially, but I think still has, and definitely a sexual abuse culture. So those parallels were definitely there. And then with the breakdown of the family unit, I think is also true for both groups, where the parents are not so much in charge anymore, where the kids in Centrepoint just ran free as a pack. The teenagers, there was no supervision. There were awful levels of neglect, of children feeling totally lost, not seeing their parents for days or so, having guardians who weren't actually protecting them or looking after them. And in Gloriavale, even though it's different because there's so much discipline, and the children get to work really hard, but then the parents are not really the authority in the end. It's actually always the leaders, and then that leads to the parents also losing a say, losing their voice when something goes wrong, especially when it came to the sexual abuse. And we've seen this and heard this from former members of Centrepoint, and definitely also in Gloriavale, where parents try to intervene when something bad happened to their children, especially sexual abuse, and they just didn't have the power to really do anything about it. And then the parallels of the us versus them. You don't go to the police, you don't talk to the outside. This is all be dealt with in-house. We know what's best. Then that leads to these similar toxic, abusive, cultic, oppressive dynamics.
Those are fantastic parallels. This is such an interesting conversation to tie these two groups together, because ultimately what I care about here is that this media expose that we're currently going through around Gloriavale, which I believe will settle down and people will forget, when we pull Centrepoint into this, we remember that this is, while it is about Gloriavale, it's also about culty groups that spread and grow, and when Gloriavale stops being in the public eye, maybe there'll be another group that grows up, or certainly Gloriavale will continue to cause harm unless something significant changes what's happening with them. But these are great answers, guys.
Anke, you interviewed somebody who had been in both communities.
Did I?
Yes, yes, I remember you sent
Hang on.
you sent me a mystery box full of research notes when we were working on Centrepoint, and you did interview somebody who was, I think he was doing a theology degree, and he was living in Centrepoint, but he was going down to Gloriavale and coming back and reporting to Bert Potter on what Hopeful Christian was up to.
Well, I know that they that the two leaders, Hopeful and Bert, that they were kind of competing in some ways. They were definitely watching each other, what the other one was doing. They were in the same business. They knew they were in the same game. So isn't that fascinating where you think that they're at such different ends of the spectrum and yet they had so much in common? And I think what we really need to focus on here is the well-being of the children and how long that was ignored, and how often even authorities, at least with Centrepoint, were in cahoots with the cult. And you kind of wonder whether that's still happening or was happening for a long time in Gloriavale with the locals there, with the former mayor of Greymouth, who sat in the first row of the Gloriavale concert being very chummy with a convicted pedophile Hopeful Christian, because Gloriavale is big business.
Yeah, it is indeed. And we've talked a bit here now about the parallels. So I'm actually also wondering, both of you, in your work in the cultiverse, running alongside, circling the same drain, have you noticed any differences, significant differences between the community that aren't just the obvious ideological doctrine ones? Because those are obvious differences. Nat, how about you?
I guess that a big difference is, in Centrepoint, people joined because they were seeking fulfillment and happiness. And there were a lot of really damaged people that joined Centrepoint for therapy because they genuinely needed something, because their lives were not in great shape. Whereas in Gloriavale, joy or happiness is not actually the goal. And I think this has, evolved as well. But you would have seen in the documentary, suffering for Christ is a positive. So the more they suffer in this life, the more rewards they'll get in the next one. So it's not self-indulgent. It's joy is not a good thing in Gloriavale. And it's why they put up with such terrible conditions, because actually, if you're suffering for Christ, it's seen as a positive.
Well, it's actually a great doctrine for a cult leader, really, because it puts the members in a perfect position to abuse them, really, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And do you know what the other thing about that is, if somebody has a talent in something in Gloriavale, they will purposely not let them fulfill that talent. So, for instance, one of the people we interviewed had a talent for writing, and they were given a job in one of the mills, working in a really sort of menial position. Another person we interviewed was, definitely more of an outdoor type person, and he was told he had to be a teacher. So it was like they purposefully tried to dissuade anybody from fulfilling any sort of passion or anything that they enjoyed doing.
It's really interesting, huh? Because I think Centrepoint prided itself on fostering people's creativity, and they had all these workshops. And I remember Angie, the teenager from Centrepoint who I first met and who was the starting point for my book, she was sent off to drama school, and Centrepoint actually paid for them, paid for that. So that's quite a difference. I can add some more too, because I think the public perception is quite different and was quite different, that maybe there was always more suspicion on Centrepoint because they were seen as this free love community, maybe with a bit of a hippie feel to it. Whereas
Gloriavale being Christian, there's this assumption that Christians must be good people per se, and they will do the right thing, even though it's very conservative. But there's this almost like the cover of religious freedom that Centrepoint didn't enjoy in the same way, even though they're classified as a religion, but Potter called himself God. And the other thing that I've seen now, especially watching your documentary, Natalie, and also with the interviews that I did back then for Centrepoint and the ones afterwards, that with Gloriavale, we have so many second generation leavers, right? Most of the people inside Gloriavale have been born in there and are now children. So you see many, many more coming out who've never, ever known another world. And these invisible prison walls are so much bigger. And the culture shock and then being a refugee in your own country when you come out. So that's a lot more extreme than what people experienced who left Centrepoint, who still had a lot to work through, who lost so much, who had these awful interpersonal situations in their families of repair work, where you had perpetrators and victims in the same families. I guess that's true for Gloriavale too, by the way. But the cultural divide is, of course, a lot bigger for Gloriavale than it was back then for Centrepoint leavers.
Absolutely, we're in third and fourth generation of members in Gloriavale, so that's the biggest difference. Is Gloriavale is still going strong, so it's been allowed to flourish. It's been going for 50 years, and they don't actually need to brainwash people there, because one of my contributors talked about them getting their factory settings created as babies. They're indoctrinated from birth. So that is the only world they have ever been exposed to. So when I hear people say, leave them alone, they choose to live in Gloriavale. Sorry, no, not if you're born into it.
That is a significant difference, because there were lots of babies born at Centrepoint, but not many. I don't know how many. I don't think there were any, were there, who were born? They couldn't have, because it wasn't going for long enough. Born and stayed throughout and then became adults. If there was a small number of people who genuinely had their whole life within that community and then entered adulthood. By the time they entered adulthood, because of the length of time it was running, it was 22 years, at best they would have been in the early 20s if there was such a person. So as opposed to almost everyone at Gloriavale being in that second generation their whole life, no other life.
And the other key difference, of course, is in Centrepoint, the kids went to schools outside the community.
Yeah,
so they were exposed to to the outside world a lot more.
Yeah, and I was at that school, the first school that they joined. So that was, I've got some insight into what that was like. They definitely were separated, and they were different, and they were treated like they were, a bit like lepers in the school. So there was an automatic social divide that reminds me a bit of the Brethrens, the exclusive Brethrens, how initially when they had their own, didn't have their own schooling, they were very socially divided. And social division is pretty powerful. I mean, you don't talk to people about what's going on. You don't share, you don't connect, you don't form deep relationships, but it's not anywhere like literally no connection, which is what happens at Gloriavale, no connection with the outside world.
I want to throw in one more thing, that Gloriavale, unlike Centrepoint, had fantastic propaganda, which we all watched a few years ago on TVNZ. And I know that Centrepoint, there was a documentary, a Fly on the Wall documentary in the early days made about them, and it probably brought a lot of people to Centrepoint as well. They were just curious about it. But at the time the Gloriavale documentaries were made, 2016, 2017, there were already reports. There was already enough knowledge about some of the things that happened. And again, the question, have we learned nothing from Centrepoint? Shouldn't someone have approached this community with a different angle to film them? But we had these sugar-coated documentaries, I call them flockumentaries, that were basically propaganda, and that actually prolonged the harm and they created this sort of false impression to the public and just led to more fascination, voyeurism, mockery, even some kind of fandom, which we certainly didn't see with Centrepoint. They were at some point just seen as this cesspit. But Gloriavale enjoyed many years not being under public scrutiny, or only being portrayed in this sugar-coated way that I think was absolutely irresponsible. So let's talk about that too, please.
Yes, they became, the joke of the nation, didn't they?
Yeah.
The kooky Christians and their strange outfits. There was actually a couple of quite prominent radio hosts and comedians who actually dressed up as Gloriavale people and really, really made a mockery of them. It's actually really appalling and quite disgusting. Some of them are still on YouTube. And I think that is it's actually embarrassing. It's embarrassing that we as a nation let that happen. You can go online and find your Gloriavale name. They really were the laughing stock, and we look down at them.
I think that there are groups of people, as our society gets more and more inclusive, there are groups of people that slowly become no longer acceptable to other, no longer acceptable to mock and make ridiculous joke of. And it used to be groups, it used to be disabled people, or it used to be people in the LGBTQ community, it used to be trans people, and now I think it's still okay to mock and make a laughing stock of cult members and cult leavers. But I'm hoping our work will change that as they become real people with understandable decisions that they made, with understandable and deep suffering that we kind of get and we resonate with. It will no longer be acceptable to do what you've just described as being, in the 2014, 15, when those documentaries came out. That's not that long ago that everyone literally was joking about them.
And do you know what? One of the most common feedback I've heard since my documentaries have come out is that they were surprised at how eloquent and likable and kind and caring the contributors are. You know what? One of their contributors was in the other one. It's just that this time they were allowed to be themselves. That was the Gloriavale version. That's Pearl I'm talking about. That was the Gloriavale version of her. And you know what? She is cool. She is feisty. She is funny. She's really good company. She is, strong. She's smart. All the things that she did not appear to be in those other documentaries because she wasn't allowed to be her.
So it's busting open this idea that members of cults or former members of cults are stupid, naive, all these sort of really horrible stereotypes.
Let's bust open another thing too. Why are we still doing business with cults? Why don't we boycott cults like we are boycotting countries that are involved in war crimes or whatever? Why don't we have the same sanctions? Why don't we have the same awareness here in New Zealand? It's always bugged me that all these years that Gloriavale exists, especially those last years when people flocked to their concerts, and these concerts were a big show attraction here in the South Island. People even came from overseas because it was just such a fun thing to watch, and probably a lot of voyeurism in there. But why do people go there and not have why didn't we see people outside, women's groups, for instance, political parties, activists protesting for women's rights and saying this is a gulag, this is not okay, these people in here are suffering. Yes, you might say there wasn't enough media back then, we didn't know this, but we since know. And I'm still waiting for the public outcry, especially for the rights of women and children in there. And I think there's been a bit of a deafening silence, as if this wasn't the cool thing to stick up for these people. And I think this is what you just said, has comes in, because these people are so easy to mock and shame, and they're almost seen as, well, they chose this, it's kind of their fault. Why should we feel that sorry for them if they want to follow this leader and live in that way and wear these stupid blue frocks, right? So the compassion then ends there, and the voyeurism kicks in. And I think it's time that we stop doing business and financially supporting cults, and that goes for all levels, with banks and with dairy companies and honey and you name it. Let's have lists where their products are listed, and let's hit them hard where it hurts. It's where the money is.
And maybe stop paying them working for families.
Yeah,
well.
right.
Yeah.
Or charitable. I mean, the obvious questions also. Charitable status. How come they get tax breaks doing what they're doing? It's just unfathomable to me.
Yeah. Could I make a little segue, because I really want to talk about this before we run out of time. One of the favorite things my favorite things about Escaping Utopia was the revelation of all the work of Melanie Reid. That's her name, isn't it? The journalist in 1993, and that was a fantastic, humorous even, but devastating as well, to discover that this strong woman she was in her 20s, wasn't she, when she did the work in 1993?
Yes, I think she said she was 26.
Yes, she went into Gloriavale, pretended that she was a Gloriavale woman, and started undercover recording, interviewed some leavers, exposed a lot of the stuff that has come out in your documentary, Nat. And it's just, it just rams home the point that, well, 2 points. First, how quickly we forget. All that new information in 1993 was lost to us. And secondly, the extraordinary role of journalism and the media, and how much journalism and the media were vilified by Centrepoint, and it continues to be part of the narrative from older Centrepoint people who were once members, that the harm has come from the media exposing what happened at Centrepoint. And right now, I'm not thinking that the harm happening at Gloriavale is because of your documentary, Nat. I'm not saying that, but I can hear that story coming out later on. The harm actually is the media, not what happened at Gloriavale, because that's the narrative of the Centrepoint people. These kids were harmed by the media expose, not by what happened at Centrepoint.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I came up against this so much, when I started my big round of research about 10 years ago, and the suspicion and the silencing, and also the families that were shutting their kids, by then adult kids, down, not to come and talk to me. And this narrative of, this happens, what happened at Centrepoint happens everywhere. It's just the media that wants to sensationalize this. I had to cut through and break through so much before I even got access to some people. And one person who'd never even ever told her story to anyone before in her life, really. And then she actually did trust a journalist, ironically enough, or maybe very telling, that I happen to be that person. But it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. And I think media needs to also recognize that we need to be more nuanced, and it's not just about who's the villain in the story, but also who are the real people here, and what has brought them in, and what has spat them out, and this whole us versus them. Oh, look at these weirdos and these groups. There's a lot of trauma porn happening at the moment with some of the cult reporting that's going on. I mean, it's gotten a lot better. I'm so pleased to see this documentary, Natalie. Honestly, can't tell you enough what a fantastic job you've done. And I wish we would see more of that, because that's the only way people, not just on the outside, get it, but maybe also the people on the inside, if they have access to it and can watch this. I just hope the way that you've told the story, that something will land for them as well.
Yes, well, I've already had some feedback, actually, that people inside are watching. I just got a message last night from somebody saying that their nephew had watched it and was outraged that he'd been told so many lies. And my hope, actually, is that the leaders of Gloriavale watch it. Because one thing that I keep thinking is they actually can still be on the right side of history. It's not too late for them. It's too late for hopeful Christian. He's dead. But they are actually in a position to say, maybe we didn't get this right. Maybe we got it wrong. You know, that the community looks to them to make their decisions. They have power. They can change this. They can say, let's rejoin the outside world. Let's end the separation, stop the control, you know, stop all the stupid rules and stop living. This is the one thing that I keep coming back to, and it really struck me in India, is they are living Hopeful's dream. They're all living Hopeful's dream. He's dead. He was corrupt.
They're suffering. They're suffering for this dream. They're suffering for his
living
dream.
A dead man's dream, and he actually, you know, he got it wrong. That's my hope. I do know that the current overseeing shepherd has watched it. I do know that. And I understand that everybody in the film and the filmmakers as well are being prayed for. So it's quite comforting.
Oh gosh, you just want to be a fly on the wall there in one of those servant and shepherd meetings when they watched it. Or I personally don't have high hopes for people who are so indoctrinated and have upheld that system for so long and so brutally that there would be a big change of heart. But you never know. You never know. And I mean, I met Howard Temple actually. I just rocked up there at the community and at Gloriavale a few years ago and just surprised them. I just drove and I actually got to talk to him, and yeah, he seemed kind of apologetic, downplaying things. Oh, we weren't aware of this and that, but now we are, and yeah, mistakes happen, and da 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 da. And then not that long afterwards, he was actually arrested as well for his alleged sexual transgressions. And I mean, if we could film inside the brains of these people, we would learn a lot, right? You never know.
We did the same thing, Anke. We drove up and met with Howard as well. And he gave us a tour, which was actually really valuable for us to just, you know, be in there and see it with our own eyes. So, you know, going into that huge. And did you get a tour, Anke?
No, I didn't get a tour. I missed it. I got the concert.
Going into that kitchen, that industrial kitchen, and seeing.
Oh yeah, I was in the kitchen. And the wardrobe rooms and that. Yeah. Yeah.
Huge, and that massive hall. You know, with all of the we just looked up and saw all of the lighting rig there, which they obviously were from all their concerts. I mean, you know, this is expensive equipment that they have, but just seeing the woman and seeing the young girls working in the kitchen with their, you know, eyes down, too scared to even look at us, you know. Yeah, it was a good reminder of why we were telling this story.
Yeah. Well, I think a good reminder of the why is also the last part of the doco, which was for me, that was a new material, because everything else in the doco, even though I met a lot of familiar faces again. It was a lot of deja vus, like Marcus Tuck and so many others, Rosanna, and then also seeing her story retold, which I find so heartbreaking and so incredible, and the way how it was reenacted really brought across what they did to her when they kidnapped her and flew her around. But what was new for me was Theo and Rosanna going to India and then actually seeing that place and seeing her sister looking so broken or dissociated, and hearing them talk so openly about rape culture and normalizing that. I mean, I thought I'd heard and seen it all when it comes to Gloriavale. I can almost be a bit blasé about it sometimes and have compassion fatigue, you know, just because I think, oh yeah, now for me, that doesn't shock me because I've known these things. But that was another level of shock to see that. And just to get my head around that you're the first person there with a camera team who's actually rocked up there and exposed this, because I think others could have done that too. Theo has been trying to get media attention for this, and you wonder, why is it so hard? Why shouldn't this be a priority that we expose this? So I'm really glad it's finally happening. Hopefully it does put some pressure on authorities to do something. But if they're not even able to dismantle a cult right under their nose in the South Island, you wonder how much can they do in the South, in South Asia, right?
Yeah, it's very, very complex because, of course, if the police rushed in there, the woman there would say, "We don't want to leave." So
Yeah.
it's very complex.
Yep.
That it was heartbreaking, and the contrast between Theo and Rosanna and the woman that they had grown up with was just, it was so huge. There's two vibrant, confident women who've been out there in the world, and they're both very inspiring people. To see them with their sort of, family and friends that they grew up with who have not had any freedom. It was, quite a contrast.
So you did actually make that really clear in the documentary, and it is what has sat with me as well. This just continued sense of when, Liz keeps on talking about, Liz Gregory, my co-host, keeps on talking about you have to stop these groups before they get too big. And what has sat with me is the knowledge that is the goal of this community, is to go overseas, to mix up the bloodline. There will be more women like Precious.
And that is why it is so urgent that something is done now, because at the moment, the oldest children in that community, I think, are around 13 or 14, and it will not be long before the next generation is bred in that community. And once we get to that next generation, there's no rights under New Zealand law. At the moment, those children have got New Zealand-born mothers, which give them some rights. But once you get to that next generation, there are no rights. So it's really, really crucial that intervention happens now. Or, Faithful said he had done some maths, and he thought that in 10 years' time there was going to be 200 people in that community.
Faithful is the son of Hopeful Christian.
No, Faithful is the leader in
yes, the Indian leader in India, Gloriavale. Yes, okay. There's a lot of names that I'm muddling in.
I know, it does get quite confusing.
Yeah, it does. Okay, well, gosh. We have somehow managed to get to the end of our time, ladies. We've had a lot of complexity.
I think we could go for
we could keep going. And I think that this conversation we've had is really quite unique because of our own connections.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much, Anke and Nat, for joining me to talk about this topic. So if you haven't already, please consider watching Escaping Utopia, the 3-episode documentary about Gloriavale that Nat has just spent a couple of years of her life filming and is on TVNZ on demand. Can it be viewed by our international guests at all, Nat? Is there a plan for that?
Not as yet, but watch this space, hopefully.
Watch this space. Okay, so I'm looking forward to that. And also check out Decult. We didn't actually talk about that at all during this interview, but we are talking about it repeatedly on Cult Chat. One of Anke's total drivers is to get a cult awareness conference here in New Zealand, and it's planned and it's happening in October here in Christchurch. You can go to decult.net and sign up to receive their newsletter, and you'll be the first to hear when tickets are available if you do that. And as well as Escaping Utopia, don't forget to listen up and watch Heaven and Hell, the Centrepoint Story, which is also on TVNZ on demand. For international viewers, I'm not sure if you can get it overseas other than on YouTube, which you can find on the Centrepoint Restoration Project site. I've got a link to the Heaven and Hell documentary on there where you can learn more about Centrepoint and the Centrepoint documentary that Nat filmed. So we hope there's been something for you today in today's episode which might help you to cult-proof your life. Please keep listening to more of the episodes of Cult Chat on Plains FM, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on our YouTube channel. Tell your friends about the show, share, leave a review on our Facebook page or on other social media. And thank you so much, ladies. It's been great having you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.